I believe that we had a lawyer from the foundation who was going to be speaking, but I don't see him here yet, so I'll keep an eye out for him. For anyone just joining, we're having a panel today on Rage Quit and Nouns DAO. It's being hosted by Verbs team, which is the big brain team of Elad and David, who are working on all sorts of awesome technical things for nouns. They approached us here at TNS a few days ago and asked if we could moderate a civil discussion and discourse about Rage Quit within the DAO, and we were happy to do so. So without further ado, I'll pass the baton over to you, Elad, and we can get the conversation started.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Yeah, well, very excited to be here today. We have a juicy conversation about Rage Quit, and thanks everyone for coming to speak and help make this awesome. So the framing in my mind for this conversation is basically to create the best podcast for the DAO about Rage Quit. What is it? Where are we? And what are some of the big considerations, pro, against, concerns, reason to be excited, etc. In terms of how we want this conversation to go, I'll give a quick intro to what is Rage Quit and some motivations, etc. Then hopefully we will have Stephen, the lawyer for the foundation, joining us for a legal Q&A. Then we will give our speakers some time to share their thoughts on how to approach this, what kind of approach to Rage Quit they prefer, and hopefully we'll have ample time afterwards for kind of a ping pong on the hottest topics from the conversation. So to kick us off with the framing, Rage Quit. What is Rage Quit? Rage Quit is basically the name of a mechanism that exists out there in the DAO world, where one can burn or hand over their token to the DAO and say, kind of, I'm out. I want to part ways with this token, and in exchange, receive from the DAO some fair share of the DAO's treasury. It's meant, in our minds, the motivation for us is security. Okay, DAO security. The big threat is what's called a 51% attack, where one or more parties can acquire a majority votes and pass a malicious proposal. Yeah. Does everybody still hear me? The app is being weird.
Yes.
Dope.
Yep.
Dope. Okay. So yeah, security purpose, 51% attack. Imagine some bad actor coming in, acquiring some votes, whether through the auction, through secondary, bribing people, and basically passing a malicious proposal. The easiest example to imagine is them wanting to send a lot of ETH to themselves. And so what do we do then? What Nouns has today is the vetoer, which is multi-sig controlled by the foundation, where they can potentially veto down any proposal, and they're there to defend us. However, the vetoer might mess up. They could not notice a malicious proposal. The whole vetoer multi-sig could be on a boat away from their keys and not be able to help. Alternatively, the vetoer could even get captured or biased. Imagine a government subpoena to the vetoer, right? And then they just start shooting down every single proposal. So the vetoer currently is a centralized risk point for us, and it is currently our only backstop for a 51% attack. Rage Quit is an added alternative, an additional defense mechanism, where if such an attack occurs, everybody else that isn't the attacker can basically quit. And not only are they leaving with their assets, they're also making the attack way less lucrative for an attacker, which in and of itself, by its existence, deters attacks. So we're very, very excited for the security properties of this feature. However, it has some side effects, which we'll touch on shortly. Another thing to touch on, I suppose, is why now? And in short, I would say that maybe the strongest reason that motivates us. Well, we're motivated by wanting to secure the DAO, and we think the DAO could be better secured. And we are motivated by helping the DAO achieve maximum decentralization, and we're not quite there yet. And the earlier in the community's life that we execute these hard changes, we think is better when the community is smaller and it's easier to coordinate. So we would prefer not to kick the can down the road. The more complex a change is, the more coordination and consensus it requires. And furthermore, since we joined the DAO, since we joined the Tech Pod, we've been thinking about security. We introduced dynamic quorum. We have a few other ideas up our sleeves that we've shared recently. And within that, we just started floating Rage Quit, and it has received a lot of interest and momentum. So we just kind of kept pursuing that. So momentum is also in our favor. And also, when you work with the DAO, momentum is something you want to capitalize on. It's really hard to get people's attention. So primary reason would be, community is early. Let's take advantage of that. And secondary would be the current momentum we have. Okay, how might Rage Quit work? Let's make this a bit more concrete. So I mentioned the basic version of Rage Quit is you give up your tokens, let's say you burn them, and you get a fair share of the DAO's assets. Now, there is an aspect that people have been considering where if you were to burn your token or give the token back to the treasury, perhaps paying a certain penalty. We've done some research on that. We think it's not material, so we're not going to get into it, but open to questions about that later. The primary differentiator in the various design options we're considering is the conditions under which one can quit. The simplest version is to say you can just quit anytime. Click a quit button and it just happens for you instantaneously. Then a couple of other versions add some more friction to Rage Quit. And the main benefit of that friction would be to mitigate some side effects, such as basically a more financial mindset to Noun buyers and Noun holders. So version number 2 would be that you could only quit when a proposal reaches an end state. So there is a proposal, and let's say it's successful, and you voted the opposite of that outcome. So either a proposal is successful and you voted no, then you're afforded the option to quit. Alternatively, you vote for a proposal. The proposal has reached quorum, and yet it has been defeated or vetoed, right? So you voted A and the outcome was B, you get to quit. Okay, so that's kind of adding some friction, some variability there. And the third option, which adds maximum friction, is the same as the one I just described, and you would have some sort of Rage Quit quorum. So let's say 10% of the total supply of nouns must Rage Quit on the same proposal for everyone to have permission to quit. If any number of nouns below that quits, then the quit just doesn't happen. So those are the 3 designs. Again, anytime, that's 1. Number 2, you must vote opposite of a proposal outcome. And number 3, same as 2, plus you need to reach some threshold. Important nuances. It is totally legitimate in this conversation to say we should not be doing Rage Quit now, let's kick the can down the road, or we should never do it. Okay, so we've received some feedback that it feels like it's a done deal. It is not a done deal. We don't have code ready to deploy on this thing. We've done research and design and have had many conversations. We're here to do what the DAO wants, what the DAO finds most valuable. And on that point, a recent idea that we're also playing with, it's still a bit raw, but we're thinking about maybe putting up a choice rank vote to the DAO for the DAO to signal to us what we should be working on. Okay, so we're trying to iterate on this kind of signaling and communication as well. So again, let's make this an amazing podcast for the entire DAO. That was a bit of an intro on why now, how it works. And let's go over now to Stephen for the legal Q&A now that we have him. Stephen, can you say hi?
Hey there, how are you?
Great. So happy to have you here. Thank you so much for joining. We know you have limited time, so we're going to jump right into it. I I'm just gonna. Do you have the questions we sent you in front of you?
I do.
Perfect. So I'm
Uh,
just
uh,
gonna I'm gonna read them out loud real quick, and then I'm gonna give you the stage to share your thoughts on the matter.
the latter, Stephen, do you want to
Um,
just do like a super quick intro as to like who Stephen is and how he relates to the nouns DAO?
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, folks. Steve Wink, partner at Latham Watkins in New York, and co-chair of our digital asset and Web3 group, and been working with 41 and the Nounders for a while now, trying to kind of sort through what the sort of legal issues that may arise. So that's me.
Awesome. Yes, and we're very grateful for your support in this process. Cool. So we have 3 top questions. We'll focus on those, and then let's see if we have time for more. The 3 top questions we have. Number 1, what are the changes we need to consider that would change the classification of nouns? That's question number 1. Question number 2, what is the marginal risk posed by the introduction of rage quit? And who does the risk fall on? And number 3, if nouns are closer to a security, what are the impacts? What risks would the org be assuming?
Okay, great. Well, so as a preliminary matter, I sort of look at this world from the lens of a U.S. securities lawyer, and of course there are other issues in the U.S. and of course around the world, but as a general matter, NFTs, like nouns that are sold and marketed as collectibles or art, should not be considered securities and should be considered commodities. So the sort of changes that I focus on are things that could cause them to be cause nouns to be at greater risk of being securities, and we have this extremely aggressive SEC in the U.S. currently, and even the chair of the CFTC recently said that they thought everything except BTC was a security in the regular token world. And we don't really know what the regulators think about the NFT world, but we know they are thinking about it. So there are there are these sorts of risks around these protocols, and it is the rage quit, the concept of rage quit in itself, I think is fine as a mechanism, for kind of leading the community. But I guess if the rage quit mechanism introduced a sort of an arbitrage element or some other element that makes nouns look like ownership of equity, say in an enterprise, that's the sort of thing that would be problematic. And if in fact somebody were to deem the nouns to be a security, well, that's pretty significant, because the securities laws require that every transaction in a security is either registered under the Securities Act or exempt from registration. And there are pretty common exemptions that people rely on every day to trade in stocks. But it's still a fairly significant lift to try to figure out how you would do that in this world. And in addition, intermediaries, or people who might be deemed intermediaries, like an OpenSea, if you were to trade on OpenSea, could be deemed to be an exchange or a broker dealer. So it creates a significant level of compliance risk, if you're trying to comply with the securities laws. And in many cases, it would just be plain unworkable. It just not, pretty much a showstopper. And then in terms of who is potentially liable, or the sort of, where do the risks fall? Well, we don't have a lot of clarity around that, but in the recent UkiDAO case, the CFTC alleged that all the members of the DAO were potentially jointly and severally liable, as if it was a general partnership. And the general partnership law in the U.S. is a state, it's based on state statutes. So it's not clear how that case will come out and what sort of precedent it would set. But that certainly is a very significant risk for a member to potentially be subject to that. To any liability that could be imposed as a result of some kind of securities lawsuit. So maybe I'll pause there and see if you would like to follow up on anything there.
I have a quick question, Steve. Yeah, why is the non-rage quit setup so much different? If even under the current setup, the DAO can make a proposal, or somebody can make a proposal for the DAO to distribute part of the treasury to different people, and that in theory could pass. Why does everything change when it's on an individual basis that you can extract from the treasury?
Well, it doesn't. I'm not saying it's necessarily changing it, because it could, because even that other action to just distribute the treasury could be potentially deemed to be some sort of distribution, sort of, like if the DAO voted to distribute the treasury pro rata to everybody on the DAO, that I think the risk would be that it's like, oh, okay, that looks like, you've got voting rights, you've got, effectively, equity ownership sort of rights, dividend rights in the treasury. That looks like a potential, stock kind of thing. So that I think there's some risk, inherent there. And the only difference with the rage quit mechanism is that you're establishing a specific way in which someone could do it, at will, effectively.
Hey, Steve, I got a question on just focusing on the veto real quick. So something in the opening comments was around, the veto sort of held by, let's say, six individuals. You need some majority to use it. These individuals live in different jurisdictions. What is the risk around sort of a subpoena coming down and forcing use of the veto against the DAO? Is that something that there's any precedence in, or is that like a totally new? Would be like a totally new, function of a subpoena? I've never heard of a subpoena like enforcing some sort of action like that within a DAO or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think. I mean, this is all new. There's no sort of playbook for how this stuff gets presented, and even the one of the things in that other UkiDAO case is that they essentially served the subpoena on Discord, and it's unclear that that's even enforceable or effective service and all that. So I mean, I think there are a ton of issues. I mean, I guess the sort of, I can imagine the sort of thing that could be problematic is if an individual receives a subpoena and feels that there's enough of a threat that they have to do something to respond, or that to protect themselves from liability. And maybe although usually that's not exercising an affirmative thing. It would be maybe it would keep somebody from exercising the veto, for example. But I think it's all new territory. Really can't point to anything specific there.
Just bringing it back to Rage Quit for a second. I just have a question for you, Steve. Or maybe you could just like drill down a little bit for those of us kind of in the audience that are maybe a bit less familiar with the Howey test and expectation of profit. Can you just talk about how the sort of like Rage Quit relates to the arbitrage, relates to the kind of increased securities risk? Just kind of explain that pathway.
Sure. Yeah. So. Yes, I think most people have heard about the Howey test. You've been around this world for the last few years. So it's this notion of that you have an investment in money in a common enterprise with an expectation of the profit from the efforts of others, and it's the real key to the test is this the expectation of profit from the efforts of others. So one of the things that we worry about in the NFT space is that if you're, if there's some attribute or the way that the NFT is marketed, or if there's a series of promises that say that you appear to rely on identifiable other to create that profit, well, that could satisfy the Highway test and end up being deemed a security. Now, typically, when it's something is sufficiently decentralized and not controlled, by an enterprise, then that's deemed to be, not that doesn't pass the test. So, when the SEC has said in the past that Ethereum kind of met that decentralization test, and while the original sale of ETH, may have actually been a securities transaction, they believed it had kind of decentralized enough by that point that it was no longer an issue. So here we've got this DAO organization that is decentralized, clearly, I think, but if in some way or another it's viewed to be the DAO itself is viewed to be this sort of enterprise, well, that could be problematic. And then the other thing is there's another case called Landreth Timber that kind of goes beyond Howey and says, look, if you have the sort of the attributes of a stock, voting rights, ownership in the underlying assets, then if it looks like a stock, then it is a stock, essentially. And so that's a piece that I worry about as well when you're dealing with this sort of rage quit mechanism or other mechanisms where you could could dividend out or distribute assets in the treasury. Does that help there, 41?
Yeah, sure. And maybe just as I guess specifically as it relates to the sort of arbitrage that can be used to access the treasury in a sort of vanilla rage quit scenario. That
right.
That as I understand it from you, that is the thing that implements something that looks like a dividend, right? That
right.
you could buy a noun and immediately kind of have access to any of the accrued value inside of
right.
the ecosystem.
Right, exactly. So that if I might actually be incentivized to vote against some proposal, that would enable me to take advantage of a distribution, to be able to get a distribution for my noun. I get kind of redeem my noun, and if the basis on which that distribution is calculated provides me with a greater than market value of my noun, well, then I can be very much incentivized to immediately profit from that. So that would be what I'd be concerned about with those sorts of mechanisms. So you wouldn't want to have that. I mean, there might be from time to time just sort of incidental arbitrage opportunities, and you may not be able to do anything about that. But sort of setting up a mechanism that has a built-in arbitrage opportunity would be problematic.
Steve, I would argue that your last example of the test, where if it looks like a stock, it is a stock, I think it's more similar to the current setup. Because speaking of dividends, if you're going to distribute a dividend, it's probably going to be across the board, right? And there already is a secondary market for trading these stocks or NFTs. So I see a parallel more there than with the rage quit mechanism on that test.
Well, I think the key is that a distribution actually hasn't occurred in that way. So I mean, if you're saying because there is the possibility theoretically that a proposal like that could pass, that yes, you're right. I mean, I think then at that point there would be a significant risk.
Yeah, rage quit would also have to happen for it to maybe violate the other test. It in its potential, just like in current potential, dividends distribution hasn't happened, then nothing would be, we wouldn't be breaking anything or any laws. But I guess the concept is that the rage quit exit potential or probability is much higher than a dividend across the board. That's kind of the assumption.
Well, I'm not saying it necessarily is. It's going to depend on the specific mechanism that permits the rage quit, right? So that if I can imagine certain mechanisms where you're saying if somehow the rage quit buyout was effectively the lesser of market value or when you get the amount you paid. I'm not saying that's even would be workable, but as an example, you wouldn't be able to capture an arbitrage that way. So that's the sort of thing I think that could be workable. I think there are real problems in trying to figure out how to make that work. But I think that's where I think it's a little different and could be implemented potentially.
Hey, Steve.
Wanted to ask, please. So, is there, as we've discussed, there's also we're considering, an implementation where you would have to have a certain threshold of multiple owners quitting for the whole thing to even occur. So I'm curious, is sort of this larger group quitting versus any individual at any time? How does that impact the classification, the risk that we're talking about? Do you have any sense on that?
Yeah, I mean, the analysis in terms of the securities analysis would be the same either way, unless that group was sort of acting in concert and could be deemed separately its own little partnership. I suspect that's probably unlikely in terms of in terms of how it actually functionally would work. But the challenge would be also if there are for creating any potential kind of partnership like entities that could be potentially liable for other things, not just the sort of the securities law analysis, but if there was some a group got together and caused some harm, well, it may be to the overall DAO, there may be a cause of action potentially against that group as being sort of a partnership that took that action. But again, this is all extremely theoretical. There's just no precedent that we can point to. And my apologies, I'm going to have to jump for another call, but delighted to have had the chance to chat with you folks.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Stephen, for joining. That was very interesting. We just to share a bit more on that. There's an active conversation still happening between us and Stephen on how to go about this and how to mitigate these risks. So yeah, we're not. Didn't expect to come out of this Q&A with any kind of strong bottom lines, but it was just good, I think, to get some sense of what we're dealing with. Okay, next, I think we would like to move to our speakers. So the speakers have been prepared in advance. I'm just going to give the audience kind of the background as well. So what we're thinking of doing, can't say exactly when, but when we feel ready, is to present the DAO with a ranked choice vote with a few options for everyone to rank from their most favorite to least favorite option. And I'm going to say those options right now, and we're going to ask each speaker to share what is their top choice and why. What would be their second best choice and why? When you go to second best, also suggest anything that maybe isn't on the list. and how might you improve upon these choices? Would you edit some of them? Would you, and would you even take an entirely different approach to learning the DAO's preference? So again, this is not like a final design of the questions. It's just the best version we have to date. The options might change as we continue to learn more from legal risks and from talking to other people outside the DAO. So this is just kind of a snapshot of right now. Option number one, low friction rage quit. Kind of vanilla, as 4-1 called it, quit anytime. Number two, medium friction, must vote opposite of proposal outcome. Option three, high friction, must vote opposite of proposal outcome and reach rage quit quorum, rage quit threshold. And option number four, no rage quit in the near term. Think about it like, let's not discuss this anymore in the next 6 months. So that's the prompt. Please share your choices and why. Yeah, just speakers, you know who you are. Please just jump up at any rate you'd like. Honk, you are not one of them. Who wants to go first?
Lame.
Okay, I'm going to pick someone at random. Vape, why don't you go first, please?
Yep. So I think my top choice today, and I've sort of waffled on this, is probably no rage quit in the next 6 months. The reason being the implementation of rage quit is, I think, mainly interesting for protecting against 51 style attacks, as you mentioned, which in the worst case is voting out the entire treasury. Currently, the veto's in place for this reason and controlled by a mix of 2 nounders, 2 noun owners, and 2 independents. As Steve kind of pointed out, it would be complete precedence to like force an active or sort of affirmative action via a subpoena. And so I think that risk is pretty reduced. And while I like the idea of getting rid of the veto for obvious reasons, I don't think it poses an existential threat to the DAO's operation or direction today. And then on the flip side, I think rage quit introduces an undesirable outcome for the DAO outside of the worst case. So like in events where the entire treasury isn't at risk. For example, I do not think like one-off rage quits or small group rage quits are necessarily fair to the DAO, since every noun is a voting share and can be sold on secondary. So the reason this was necessary and incepted for Moloch DAOs is because you could actually vote voting shares down into non-voting shares. And so those non-voting shares had no secondary value and can't be exercised for anything except for sort of claiming their portion of the treasury. Additionally, I think there's increased regulatory risk, as we've been discussing, without a very complex implementation, which carries its own risk, which may hurt the DAO's ability to do anything in the U.S. or otherwise deter U.S.-based members. So in summary, I don't see the gain outweighing the risks at this time.
Awesome. Any other comments on like a second best or a different? You want to elaborate on what you would want to see happen? Like if you couldn't get this outcome, would there be any sort of other outcome that you have in mind? One of the other outcomes or something new entirely?
Yeah, out of the choices, I mean, a very high barrier, high friction rage quit would be the next best, obviously. I think I would want it to be as much of an all or nothing affair as possible if rage quit is triggered, meaning like you distribute, most of maybe even distribute or dissolve the treasury in case of a sort of rage quit activation, to deter some of these like smaller, I think, smaller rage quits or smaller distributions from the treasury is just go for like full dissolution.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. DCF, do you want to go next?
Sure. GM, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, it's moving. So my take is I would prefer a rage quit with a significant fee, like 10 to 15%. I'm coming at this less from an angle of, hey, I'm worried about the Nounder's veto being used maliciously or anything like that. I don't think that would happen. I think we're too small right now for that to be the case or to really worry about it. There's like much larger DAOs that have stolen or done much worse with money in the past, or even currently active right now. I think Nouns is very clearly, and the security front, Noun is very clear selling a product like a JPEG and not selling a security. I think that the addition of a rage quit is like, how much more security like does that make us? And I think it's very marginal compared to all the things we've already done anyway. That I think saying, oh, we're not a security without a rage quit, and we suddenly are one with a rage quit, is a poor argument, because if we didn't, like, we do a lot of things. For example, we pay people without KYC based on votes. Nounders get every 10th one for free in lieu of payment. Like, there's a lot of other things that, and nouns are voting shares. Like, there's a lot of other things that could make you security. Like, if someone wanted to sue you and make that argument, regardless of if you have the rage quit, they're going to make that argument. What I think it's useful for is the community sentiment and the building of this vision, right? Right now, I'm a recent person to the Nouns DAO, so take everything I say, of course, with a grain of salt, and don't take everything I say as gospel, as I have like a lot less experience than a lot of the Nounders, a lot of people that have been here, and I have very few. I think I only have like 4 or 5, so I'm not like, oh, this is the biggest trade of my life and I really care about an arbitrage or some shit like that. I just think that when I come into the community right now, there's a lot of head butting, and that's because some people are upset and some people are happy. And I don't think it's fair to tell people you should make. People have made like $1 million investments here, multiple $100,000 investments here. I don't think it's fair to tell people that money doesn't matter, the price of your noun doesn't matter. You're just supposed to donate away all of it. Why do you even care about it? Yada yada yada. I think some people did invest for NFT gains and for the win, and other people invested because they wanted to donate to a bunch of charities or do it or proliferate the meme, or some people might have done both, or whatever that is. But at some point, things happen and people might want to move on. And if they want to move on, I think there's no need for them to make the community a nasty place, right? We don't need to be infighting about proposals and spending. We don't need to be infighting about the treasury size. We don't need to like create bad vibes. A lot of the product of NFTs are a sense of community. It's you're joining these people, you're having fun with them, you're creating things you want together, you're making more art, you're commissioning different like public goods and creations and things like that. And if some people just want to move on with their lives and they don't want to be part of that, I think it's unfair for them as a part of our community, as one of our holders, to say, too bad, you have to take half of treasury value, or in some cases, like a fifth of what you've paid, even though the treasury has enough to give you like a fair piece so you can move on and help create those good vibes, right? That's generally my take. Is I think it's really healthy for the community, and I think it's healthy for price action, because going forward, no noun will trade less than its book value. It'll always sell at worst case book value. I think people buying in will then be buying in for the proliferation of the meme, and they won't be buying in purely for the financial reason, or because they can vote for a rage quit, or because they can maybe one day push for more value to them, and so on and so forth. Like, even right now, I think you say people don't extract value from the treasury, but it happens. Like, you have people with a few nouns or many nouns voting to do proposals that enrich them. Like, there's a lot of other stuff that gets people rich too. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but that's my take. And I think the fee is good because it gives people a reason to stay. Like, there's no way I could rage quit right now and think that the treasury is going to go up tomorrow, right? It's not like we're farming, or it's not like we're suddenly going to find product market fit that's going to make nows go to the moon. It's not a business. So I think having a heavy fee makes the people that stay happy, because it gives excess value to them to spend on proliferating the meme or doing whatever they want. And it lets people that leave happy, because they didn't have to fight on the secondary for one. They didn't have to vote no on everything. They didn't have to be all negative Nancy's. Just got to move on happily. Yeah.
Hey, DCF, I just wanted to maybe, I don't know if correct, but just point out an inconsistency. You said that people would be able to quit at book value, but in the scenario you're describing, it would actually be book value minus the fee, right? Like minus 10 to 15%.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. Which, I mean, I guess is a much smaller delta versus the current secondary market.
Which is a small. I don't know. I'm not watching secondary tonight. I'm just talking about a healthy mechanic.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I'm just pointing out.
Sure.
Like, if the quote unquote book value is like, 50 ETH and they're selling for 35 and it's a 15% penalty to quit. Now we're actually talking about something that's like a lot closer, I guess, to the secondary than.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the reason it also trades at 30 to 35 is because people think that this vote is incoming and they will be able to rage quit, or the treasury is priced wrong. Like, I think as now, you don't even want people making that bet. You don't even want it to be an option. The longer you wait, the more nouns that sell below book, the more likely this kind of push for book becomes, the more malicious buyer, quote unquote malicious. I don't think anyone's malicious. At the end of the day, a vote holder is a vote holder. We shouldn't be questioning, like, oh, they're doing this wrong, or they're doing this right, or their intent is wrong. Like, at the end of the day, if you have a vote, you have a say, and we should respect all says. But yeah, you're right that the spread's not that big right now. Like, if you do a 10% fee off the current like 55 ETH or whatever, you get 50 ETH. And if this is probably going to take us like a month and a half to implement or something like that. So by that time, it'll be diluted further.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we can probably dive into some of these mechanics a bit later. I just want to give all the speakers a chance to share their position. Dev Carrick, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. You guys able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. And Verbs folks, thanks again for hosting this, and to everybody listening, thanks for joining. Looking forward to having more of these discussions, and I'm sure this won't be the last on this topic. For the most part, I agree with Vape. I think my hesitation would be to implement something that, or rush into an implementation. My leaning would be more towards a high friction rage quit, which personally aligns with my desire to have the rage quit mechanic serve the DAO, the safety of the DAO and the treasury first, and the individual second. Think the hypothetical, again, proposal comes in to pay out the treasury to everyone, or to one individual, giving the treasury ability to fork out of that. If we, for some reason, weren't able to get a high friction mechanic, I think I agree that the veto is still sufficient protection for that, and we don't need to rush into it. One thing I would like to sort of bring up to the discussion, but we don't need to dig into too much today, is that we talk a lot about rage quit here from the mechanical perspective, from the financial perspective. There are folks that are participating in the Nouns ecosystem without owning a noun, or working in the ecosystem. Definitely would want to encourage those folks to think about this as well, and voice your opinions, how you think and feel about the rage quit discussion, because this does affect how the vibe, if you will, of the Nouns community works, and also we want to make sure we're not offending builders, etc., too much.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody want to ask Dev a question before we move on? Okay, cool. Hindsight, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I suppose I would have probably fallen mostly on the same side as Vape and Dev, in the sense that, like, my initial reaction to this was that, yeah, like, I think that it's more a question of, like, the 51% attack. Like, rage quit is a protection against a 51% attack, and the question therefore is, like, how urgent or how likely do we see that is happening now, and therefore how urgent or how important is answering the question about the implementation of rage quit at this moment, or what do you think that is? Because, like, I suppose my answer to this question is, like, almost like a variation on question 4, which is, like, I don't think that we shouldn't talk about it or shouldn't be developed, because this is something that does need to be developed, but at the same time, it's about how we make this is a very, very complex decision, and I suppose this is like the first conversation really, apart from with yourself, Elad, that I've had with anyone on it. So when it comes to very, very complex decisions and groups making very complex decisions, like, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the most important thing is to have, like, good structures and decision making sort of processes And I think that, like, starting this conversation now and thinking about the development of it is the most important thing. So I'm in favor of like implementing rage quit. I'm in favor of starting it now, but I just think it's probably not the most important thing for now. But at the same time, like, I think it's very important to recognize as well, there are two reasons why people want to rage quit. Number one being, or why we should implement a rage quit. Number one being the 51% attack. But I think that, like, although I'm on the opposite side of DCF in terms of it being implemented maybe like in the very short term, I probably think it's very important to realize or recognize, I suppose, some of the points that he's making. It's not healthy for the DAO. Like, if we implement rage quit, it will have like a significant impact on the constitution, as in the people that are in the DAO. As people like leave and new people come in, and it's very, like, there's a lot of things to consider about how that'll affect like what type of people are in the DAO and who's buying into it. But at the same time, what's happening at the minute with the difference between what the book value is and what the mint price is, and maybe that matters to you, maybe it doesn't, but it does have an impact as well. The fact that it is there does have an impact on the type of people who are buying, and I think recognizing why that gap exists is something that, like, from this conversation needs, it's a separate conversation, but it's something that just needs to generally be recognized. But yeah, so I think that, like, for me, it's like, a conversation we should start now. We should push forward. We should think about, like, how do we work through, as a group, a complex decision such as this. There's way less more simple decisions that I think that we as a group could improve the process for. But this is one that's extremely complex. If it was implemented, it'd be some version of, like, there'd be some penalty, and it might be like a liquidity penalty where you can't, any newly minted noun can't be rage quitted for, I don't know, 90 days or something like that. Because if, like, obviously if we did rage quit now and somebody's benefiting by quitting on the book value, it means that, like, the older people or the people who bought earlier at a higher price are, effectively giving money to people that bought, like, more recently at a lower treasury value. So if we had a rage quit mechanism that allowed, a frictionless rage quit mechanism, I just think that would have like a negative impact on those older holders as well. But if you had something that had some sort of liquidity premium kind of baked into it, I think that might be, a good compromise if we were to implement something. But again, I think it's good to start the conversation, and these are the sorts of things that can be worked out whenever we have it started.
Awesome. Thank you. 4156, can you go next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I don't have a ton to add to what Vape said. I think he said it very well. The only thing I would add, and I think in general, I'm also in the camp of kind of somewhere between high friction rage quit and no rage quit. I don't think it's a panic to implement this. I do think in the long run it is critical that we remove the veto, but I do also think that time is sort of on our side with respect to its removal, and I think that's because as time passes, there's a lot of kind of good things that happen. One is hopefully at least the regulatory environment kind of crystallizes, and we can actually have some certainty around what we should and shouldn't do. The sort of like dynamics of the Nouns ecosystem become more familiar to us. We have more expertise, and we have hopefully more experts and more sort of brain power around that can help solve the problem. And so I think in the long term, we should implement some form of high friction rage quit, or something like it that allows us to remove the veto. And I think actually 999 said this in the Nounders chat. That we could think of rage quit as something that the DAO does collectively rather than people do kind of individually within the DAO. And I think that's a nice way to think about it. I would also say, like, one thing I feel very, very strongly about is like this idea that some either minority or like powerful voting bloc kind of tries to force through an implementation of rage quit that for reasons of trying to, remove the kind of like liquidity discount. I, in general, I'm pretty strongly opposed to that sort of approach because it feels quite immoral to me, to kind of like increase everyone else's kind of like regulatory exposure, um, uh, for the reason that you want to increase your own profits. And any sort of like low friction mechanism, I think, does have this property, right? Where essentially like the quitters get the ETH, and then the stayers get the regulatory consequences. As Stephen alluded to, like, if nouns are classified as securities, for example, they get delisted from OpenSea, right? So we're not even talking about like these sort of like long tail crazy legal consequences. We're talking about like the people that stay actually like not even having like liquidity to sell their nouns, or like continue sort of um, building the project. So in general, I think we should be super careful on the sort of like regulatory consequence side of things. And yeah, that the veto is long term a very high priority, short term pretty low priority, and that we should generally kind of think about the rage quit conversation um, based on those constraints.
Thank you so much for adding all this context. David, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Great.
Yeah. Okay. So for one, I'd like to ask you kind of as a maybe to get kind of the foundation's perspective on the veto part. So I had this kind of thinking after hearing DCF speaking that while nouns are selling below book value, that it may attract people who want to buy them with kind of a future expectation that they'll be able to extract book value from the treasury, assuming it happens at a point where the book value is higher than what they bought it for, and maybe they accrue enough voting power to, as you said, like put a proposal on chain to add rage quit. Would that be something that the vetoer would veto, or is it like, or would that pass? I can see some thinking here, like if it puts DAO members at regulatory risk, maybe it could be considered like an attack, but maybe it's not, and rage quit should be. So, and following that thought is like, okay, if that may happen, maybe we should get in front of it because it'll eventually happen anyway, and we should think about what's the kind of safest version of this to happen. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts. I think one is it's important to recognize, and I think this sort of like misunderstanding kind of continues to exist in the community that like the Nounders control the veto, et cetera. And even Stephen mentioned that he's worked with the Nounders since we started the project, but at this point he is the counsel for the Nouns Foundation, right? So we've worked very hard on that front to also like try to implement, however nascent, some sort of like structure, right? That puts the veto in the hands of an org that is not the Nounders. So, I make up 1/6 of that group, and so certainly I can't say what it should or shouldn't do with respect to exercising the veto. One thing I would say, or actually two points I would make. One is that like that we've said from the outset that the intent of the veto is to protect the DAO against kind of existential risk. So I guess we would have to make the assessment, at the time a proposal came about, if this idea that like increasing the regulatory exposure like actually represented an existential risk to the DAO. The other consideration is like to the extent that the foundation is like the kind of like only real world legal footprint for the DAO, and it and to the extent that the board members of the foundation kind of take on some personal risk for kind of like being that the directors of the org that is the legal footprint for the DAO. it's I think at least a little bit difficult to imagine like the foundation not doing anything or otherwise being sort of like compelled to watch the thing that it purports to represent um, become something that is offside, right? So I would expect that like the sort of like natural incentives within the foundation would be to kind of protect against even further sort of like legal and regulatory exposure. That's my best guess as to what would happen, but it's very theoretical at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you say just a few more words on the veto war operations? Just like how many out of how many and kind of need to sign something for it to happen. How are you as a team monitoring proposals and making sure that the vetoer never misses something important?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one thing that we need to do as the foundation is, just generally try to be more transparent and public about our operations. I don't know that I want to like do that ad hoc right now. I think it's something that we should kind of strive to do, over the next 6 months. Part of it, part of the reason that we haven't done that is we've been sort of in certain ways like advised to not expose too much about the foundation, but I think we probably have gone a little bit too far in the sort of like obfuscation direction, and especially when you kind of like put that org beside something as transparent as the DAO, it kind of feels wrong. So we internally, the veto is kind of kept in a multi-sig. We have a process in place for making sure keys are secured. There are hardware wallets, etc. And I think everyone on the board is an engaged member, and we're kind of continuously watching everything that's happening. So I do think we will try to kind of formalize and release some kind of additional documentation around how we secure the veto, and when we would use it. I think that's a good goal for the upcoming year.
I think one point I want to make on that, just because people like to say the Nounder veto, but actually there's a minority of Nounders that control the veto. So even if all the Nounders wanted to veto something, it would take buy-in from independents, et cetera, to actually exercise the veto. So I don't like go around crusading around that terminology, but it is not in fact a Nounder veto at this time.
So just a question. One of the things that the reasons that I think probably this is something that should be worked on, but it's something we should take time about, is because the risk of a 51% attack is quite low. And this is more of a question. I'm just wondering, is there any concern that obviously a point that DCF raised was that maybe the current mint price is being held up by people that think maybe the veto or maybe the rage quit might come through, and they're maybe playing that the book value game. But is there any risk that let's say, for instance, we say, right, the veto is going to be here for 2 years, and that the auction value goes down significantly and stays down significantly because people see that there's people can buy these things for very cheap, the value of them are down, and then there's kind of an incentive then from both holders and new buyers to sort of create a threat to both Nouns and the Treasury by extracting the value in different ways through coordination on increasingly bad proposals, and that kind of can create a negative downward circle. And I just wonder, does anybody think that is because I'm on the side of it's about it's about a 51% attack, but I can sort of understand and I think the whole experiment comes maybe a little less interesting if the rage quit is enforced without a lot of thought. But I do think it's like an interesting question to think about as well, that threat to the DAO.
I mean, to me, that feels more just like a failure mode for the experiment than like a specific kind of threat, right? Like if the culture is so polluted that everyone's trying to pass proposals that kind of like um, just pay them out, kind of do the bare minimum of work, and the whole thing is kind of like designed to kind of like sneak past the veto or or otherwise like um, just do the bare minimum to extract the treasury, and like these proposals are getting passed such that the treasury is completely drained. I mean, I would just consider that like a kind of like irreversible, potentially irreversible kind of like failure of the culture, more so than a specific mechanic.
Yeah, I suppose like, and and I'm not, I don't have an answer to this, but like they could become irreversible. But like these sort of things happen, and they kind of happen like slowly. If you kind of like step through how something like this might happen, and because at the end of the day, the discount does exist at the minute, so like a lot of the times in crypto we say how much worse can it get. The answer is always way worse than that. But so like what I'm saying is that you can see how it happens slowly, and I suppose that's probably a lot of kind of what I talk about is how to improve decision making processes so that we can make better collective decisions. But you can see how it would happen, like the culture can get polluted because of this, and like it takes like one proposal that's just slightly worse than the one before it, and then the next one's just slightly worse, and it's a slow gradual process, but one that's like it's like a stage, early stage, cancer that can become whatever the rest of the stages are. But you know what I'm saying there.
Yeah, I mean, I think these sorts of like feedback loops are inherent like throughout the crypto space, right? And you see them kind of continuously like kind of ping ponging, right? Like you get the feedback loop in one direction, and you get a bubble, and you get the feedback loop in the other direction, and it seems like absolute despair. And at the very top, it feels like it's going to keep on going forever, and at the bottom, it feels that way too. I think it's just difficult to try to grapple with the what ifs. Like I think we just have to kind of deal with where things are today. You can play the same game with like any of these major projects that have been around forever. Like, what if all the Bitcoin miners turn off their ASICs and the network security goes away? I think we just have to kind of like deal with um, the acute problems that we see, and do the best that we can, and just hope that the feedback loops become favorable based on our kind of like short term, very specific actions that we take.
So I wanted to, sorry, Todi, I'm assuming we have some more time. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wasn't sure if you were rugged there for a second, so I was going to pipe up. But go ahead.
No. Yeah, I wanted to just touch a bit again on kind of the why now argument, and maybe hear some more people talk to that specifically. I just think that our community right now, the community is going to keep growing and evolving in all kinds of ways. And the general trajectory that I believe is true is that it'll become gradually harder to coordinate just because of the size of the community. And I think, by the way, my sense, by the way, since from day one till now, is that it's already become richer in kind of rifts and in disagreements, and some gaps have been growing. And so introducing rage quit and removing vetoer, these kinds of activities seem challenging and scary. And so, I mean, I'm still of the opinion that doing hard things early is just going to be easier. So not necessarily arguing to deploy rage quit tomorrow, more arguing that rage quit should be something that or rage quit as what it represents should be something that we're thinking about. Again, kind of the decentralization aspect, getting ready to remove the vetoer, like feeling comfortable with that, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to remove it, but just getting comfortable with it and leveraging the current community size to do so. Who here like please share who here agrees, disagrees. Like, feel free to call me an idiot. I'm just trying to understand the sentiment in the room around. Is there no fear waiting, a year or two to do this?
Yeah, Elad. So after hearing all the speakers, I'd like to give some comments and also answer your question at the same time. I'm kind of in the same boat as hindsight in the sense that I don't think it's the most important issue we face. I do think that you guys built a beautiful thing. Like, this is a near perfect thing that I love selling and speaking about because of how everything is. It's almost like a closed loop, like a closed circle. But the only piece missing in the circle to be able to like sell it confidently is, or to proliferate the meme, I think, is the veto. So I think I would put the veto not in the very short term or eliminating the veto, but not in the long term either. I consider it to be a medium term issue. And rage quit at the moment seems to be the only defense mechanism in sight. But I say medium term because I don't think rage quit is the most urgent priority we have. I think we have a much higher risk, even than a 51% attack, in the fact that we are executing transactions without, of interactions with contracts where we're not auditing the transactions or the interactions with those contracts. Like, I don't know if there's anybody going deep down into every single proposal that interacts with an external contract, looking into that stuff. Like, I think that is higher risk than a 51% attack, and I think we need a mechanism to fight against that. At the same time, the 51% attack maybe is more likely than it seems. So I kind of disagree with hindsight on that because, especially given the fact that the nouns are going for so cheap in the auctions, and there are whales in the ecosystem that already have a lot of nouns. We don't know if the DAO is being. We have no idea. Like, we have no insurance that the DAO is not being cyber attacked in the auctions. Like, maybe these whales are accumulating in a bunch of different addresses, and in theory, could push a malicious proposal where the veto would have to come into play, right? And then lastly, I think that another higher priority item is we need a mechanism in place to use the treasury more efficiently. Like, I think, and we talked about this yesterday, I think we are passing proposals, or more proposals than we should, without feedback on price. I think I mentioned yesterday also that I think social voting or quid pro quo situations are happening inevitably, and that private voting would solve this. And I consider it to be an even more pressing issue because it presses down on the efficiency use.
Yeah, to be clear, I think it is like a risk. Anything that's like a DAO ender or like potential to be a DAO ender should be high priority because you need to be thinking about those long tail risks. But I do think that with something like this as well, you could set, I think, like maybe part of the solution to this. It's kind of like maybe like a Scottish independence voters, a vote of independence for anywhere, that you set like a time for it to happen, and that could be in like 6 months or a year, and then that focuses the minds of everybody involved, and that vote could be a multi, like with the choice out of 4 things that we know we have to work out the answer to between now and then. And the answer might be to do nothing at the end of it, but at least then it gives everybody like a focal point to think about, like both from your side in terms of like the development of it, but also in terms of people's responses to maybe how it should be implemented. So that could be like a forcing function for people to actually think about these things, because oftentimes you just don't think about things until you have to do so. But I do think, like, at the same time, the order in which we do things does matter as well. From Elad's perspective, I'm sure he's thinking, as a team, they're working on, issues for the protocol, and figuring out like what the order of those things should be. What are the most important things? That could be like a, signaling question or some sort of question that is posed, to nouners, like, what do you think? Or like some sort of vote on like what are the most important things, where people can suggest it goes to a vote, and maybe these are the most important things. Because I think that when we're given a lot of like binary choices, obviously when it comes to upgrades to the governance contracts. You have to do them sequentially. So the sequence in which you do them is very, very important. And because as well, the fact that, although we're still like small, there is like a lot of fractionalization of the people. There's a lot of there's not as good, it's not as easy to communicate with everybody involved in the voting. I'm not sure exactly how you fix that. I know you don't want the proposal votes to become some sort of signal mechanism, but I don't know, it might be interesting to put up a proposal, even though it has no bearing. Imagining it was a rage quit and where people can leave their comments, would they voted yes, no, or abstain on it, and then give the reasons just as an indicator of where people's minds are at, because it is hard to communicate with everybody and get everybody thinking about the one thing.
Thank you, guys. We were wondering, is there anyone in the audience that wants to steel man the case for rage quit, wants to come up and try to argue for that? Please raise your hands if there is anyone.
If you're not familiar with Twitter Spaces as well, you hit the heart button, and then on the far right, there's a hand button to ask to come up. Okay, added a couple people there, Elad.
Thank you.
We've got Nikki G, who's a new nouner, who just joined with a couple nouns last week, I believe, and it looks like Machi is also joining here.
All right, let's hear some for rage quit. Machi, please.
Yo, thanks for having me up, Elad. Steelman. I think I was one of the earliest guys asking for rage quit a long time ago. But Punk 4156 talked me out of it, and he always does. He always lead. He's like my spiritual leader in decentralization. Like every time I have some ideas, he's very convincing. Yeah, but definitely rage quitting can also add a economic mechanism to it, meaning that knowing that you can rage quit, you would be more willing to bid higher or bid on a noun because you feel like, okay, I do have an out. It's not like nouns, like to the normal person that is not really Web3 ethos focused, feels like, okay, it's kind of like a charity. I just throw my noun in. I put money in here. I'm not looking to make a return on it. I'm just going to be part of this group that is very Web3, try to move Web3 forward kind of a group, I think. I mean, that's how I see it. It's like nobody else can see a way where I'm going to make money on it, right? That's not what people come into nouns thinking from day one. But even if I don't want to make money, I'll put it like this. Like I produce a few horror films and I love horror films. I love it so much. I'm like, okay, I don't give a fuck if I lose money shooting a horror film. So I put aside $3 million US to shoot horror films. But after the first two horror films lose a lot of money, like zero return, I'm a little bit less passionate about it, you know? And I think it's kind of with nouns too. It's like I was buying my nouns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nouns. I'm like, yeah. But then slowly I'm like, dude, this money's probably will never come back. And I won't be able to vote my money back to me or anything. I started getting a little nervous. And of course, those are the arguments. It's like, you don't need a rage quit, just go sell it in secondary. But it's not that liquid. And I've felt it myself, it's not that liquid. I think the other part is there is a mechanism that wouldn't drop to like 30 ETH right now, or the lower points, because people would be like trying to arb it to a certain extent too. We won't know until it's in play, right? We can theorize like what will happen. I think 4156 made a couple of good points to me, saying something like, well, you're not that committed then if you could rage quit. That's freaking true. And I think one way to mitigate the rage quitting problem of people just arbing it, like saying, okay, well, I think if I bid and win for like 40 ETH, I can rage quit for 50 or 60 ETH. We'll put a timer on it. It's a reverse vesting mechanism. So you need a bid and won the ate for, I don't know, 2 weeks. I don't know what a time frame would be, but basically you rage quit for a different percentage. If you've been around longer, you get more. Maybe you can only rage quit for 50% after 7 days, and linearly out some way. So by the time you get to a month or 3 months or 6 months, you can rage quit for the full 100%. Anyway, there's tons of
Just in the
ideas.
interest of time, Machi, thanks for your thoughts. Is anyone on the panel here have any thoughts about Machi's statements? Maybe Vape or Dev?
If I could add,
Sure, go ahead, DCF.
yeah, I kind of also wanted to add to what Machi is kind of saying, or like what the norm in nouns is right now. Again, like I'm new here, so I don't have a lot of background, but I know like as a new buyer, I think the price of my noun does matter to me, and I think we're not in a time where you can treat nouns today like you could treat nouns from last year, just because of overall market sentiment, what crypto is today, like we're in a time when nouns are selling for much more. There were times where any project could put up a mint and you would fully mint out. But today, even good projects like Forgotten Runes, Wizard Club, or Parallel, or things like that, they have difficulty selling their NFTs. Like the last Forgotten Runes mint only sold like 20% for the Warriors. So it's a time where people aren't just like throwing around aping, saying for the vibes, for the vibes. Like the money and the price of a noun does matter. And I think it's hard to both have the stance of saying, oh, money doesn't matter, price of a noun doesn't matter, and also saying that we need a treasury so people can come make proposals and get paid and yada yada yada. Because the amount of money we have in the treasury is the amount of money we can pay people to do stuff. And it's like because we have a huge treasury, people are coming to take advantage of that treasury. They're asking for like more and more money. Like we have people, it's like consistently normal to get like $300,000 plus salaries from the Nouns DAO, or it's like consistently normal to ask for the Nouns DAO to buy a noun for you. Like this is supposed to be a very valuable luxury thing that's hard to get that you feel proud of. Now in this current market, nouns it's like people just anticipate down only unless there's a rage quit. Like this is the only way for us to protect our price to make sure that people can't come and enter for without some really cheap thing. Like when I talk to people about nouns right now, they're not saying, "Oh, I'm so excited about the meme. I can't wait to have one. I want to make it my PFP and show it off." They're saying like, "Wow, they're spending so much with the treasury. Oh, if I do the math, I'm really worried that they're going to spend half of it before I can get anyone to buy it or before the bull market comes back." Like as much as we don't care about price and we do care about creating positive vibes and things like that, the price is something that really impacts those vibes and it impacts the health of the community and people caring to be here or wanting to be here. So I do think having rage quit, or it doesn't have to be a rage quit, like you could also help price in other ways. Like, why does the DAO itself mint and sell a noun every single day and dilute all the current holders when people like Machi are saying, I can't get liquidity on secondary for my 8 nouns. I want the money and I kind of want to move on. But meanwhile, I have to compete with myself, which is the DAO, selling a new noun, diluting me every day, right? Like we could also pause
Can you not
minting.
though make the same argument with respect to Bitcoin? You
Can
know,
you not make
if
the same?
like the fact that I would argue that the fact that this is a DAO or not a DAO doesn't matter. Like the social contract from the outset has been one noun every day forever. You know, like the Bitcoiners could come together and agree to move up the halvenings in a bear market, right? But they don't do that because there's a kind of social contract and a credible neutrality in kind of leaving the emission rate untouched.
Yeah, well, like I don't have any bitcoins, but either way, I think that with Bitcoin, it's a very different thing. Nobody's proposing to the Bitcoin Foundation to pay them a bunch of Bitcoin to like clean up a basketball court. It's not like a war on how do we spend our Bitcoins in our treasury. If it was like put on the outset, okay, here's how many nouns you have, and if you run this noun validator, you get extra nouns, or you run this machine, you get paid with more nouns. Like It's kind of a very different thing. This is very akin to us getting proposals for people to pay them salaries to do things for us or to pay them to do something for us. Like the money is a core element of it.
Yeah, it's a good point, and in the sense that, like, maybe it's not the case that, I disagree that I think the supply is already constrained enough. One a day actually isn't that much. I think the inflation rate of it's like, not the problem, but I do think that, there is, like, it's like listen, I'm only good at like zero of these. It doesn't really, like, that's not the thing that really concerns me. But the price at the same time, I can say that and say that the price that the auctions go for does matter, in the sense that, the more, if we are doing like really cool shit with, the treasury, the more that we have in the treasury, the better. So the more that the more we have, the more we're able to do. And
Yeah, but because they go for so cheap, because I'm getting diluted every day, because there's no proper floor, because people are saying, "Oh, price doesn't matter," I feel like I'm losing as a noun holder by not finding a way to grift the treasury. Like it's a bit weird, you know? Like I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
"Oh,
That's what
why
was
am
my
I on
point
this
earlier.
space for free right now? I should probably put a proposal to get paid a few ETH because I spent my time." Like it's kind of dumb, you know? And like I think us all having this mindset that who cares about price? It's up only. Like that's very bull market. We need to be thinking more like let's cut costs, let's reduce burn, let's like win together, let's figure out how to take care of our people. Like it right now it's very not that vibe and it creates a lot of headbutting because if you're a noun holder and you do have that mindset, everyone hates you, everyone shits on you, or it's like, oh, you're not being nounish, bro, donate your money. And I think it's just really bad to have that mindset.
So, just on the topic of public perception, because I think it's important to have a balanced take on that, I wanted to invite Darlington up as well, who is a new nouner who joined at a similar time to DCF. And I was struck by something he said to me in his first week within the DAO, which is that he joined Nouns because Nouns is like punks for builders. And so I just wanted to say that I don't think that the complete perception of the DAO from outside is exactly how DCF is portraying it. And I also think we should consider that if your audience, for example, DCF, is seeing FUD posts that are selected to make the DAO look like it's wasting money, and then you ask them if the DAO is wasting money, then there might be an implicit bias there with how they answer. So I'll come back to you in a minute, but I just wanted Darlington to sort of give some perspective from his side of things, if you could.
Yeah, everybody. Tony, thanks for bringing me up. I understand the sentiment. Like when number goes down, it feels bad. But the way I've been looking at the treasury is that the treasury is there to be spent to hopefully create the community and the excitement that will drive more demand for that number to go up. If we're thinking about a noun per day forever, we're talking 27 years to reach the supply of a CryptoPunk or a Bored Ape. And so one half of what what clones are, or between 1/3 of all of the different ape collections. Like it's a very long time to generate even that size of a community. So to say that we need to grow at one per day and have a demand of more than one per day, especially when people have multiple nouns, I don't think is that unachievable. So I would rather the treasury be being spent than me sitting here calculating, well, if I rage quit out of the treasury, I can pull X amount out of it. Like that doesn't seem to have the potential growth that I think could come from having a more engaged community that is spending the treasury well. Now, I do agree in the sense of like we should be questioning how the money is spent or how the ETH is spent, and really auditing the projects that are occurring. I'm fully in support of that, but that doesn't mean that we should be sitting there like on our hands saying nothing should go through, because then there's no point of having a 28,000 ETH treasury. At that point, it's useless.
Look, on the subject of price and proliferation and interest in new people coming, I think there's a subject that we don't touch upon enough that to me is significant, which is the fact that if we generate really big momentum, excitement with, I don't know, something like NARS or something in real life, and we have a lot of people want to come by nouns, the liquidity is simply not there, and the one a day is not enough to sustain that excitement that comes in bursts or could come in bursts. So the issue is we spend a lot of money on things that bring excitement, but we can't attend to the demand, right? The liquidity is just not there. So have we thought about something like the DAO buys a bunch of nouns, provides liquidity on something like SudoSwap, and therefore provides an avenue to kind of attend to that demand, which in the end, yes, it's more liquidity. It could have some downward pressure on price, but also it gives the opportunity to have upside on price and be able to attend to that demand.
One thing is clear,
Yeah.
there's a lot of interest in these types of discussions. And Elad, I think we're going to have to make this an ongoing series, maybe Tech Talks here on TNS or something, because I think there's a lot of interest. But we do have a few members of the panel who have a hard stop at 12:30, so we will have to wind this down.
Yeah.
I'll pass it over to you, Elad, for some final words.
Yes. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who came here to participate, to speak, to listen. And yeah, this is one of those moments when we feel fantastic, when we feel like we got a team here that is trying to make nouns amazing. Very grateful for everyone. Very juicy discussion today. Hoping we definitely discuss it more. So, just to wrap it up a little bit, I think on why to do rage quit, I think the security and removing the vetoer, those arguments stand, and we've heard a big sentiment today that it just doesn't feel extremely urgent to people. Very important, but can probably wait. So we got that sentiment pretty strongly. And another kind of category of like why yes to rage quit is everything to do around price, whether it's pushing up the floor price, whether it's giving potential buyers this kind of insurance policy that they have an exit, liquid exit, so that it might attract more buyers, and those sort of arguments. And I think the no to rage quit or the trepidation is because it can have significant impact on the culture, on who buys and why, and it can cause all kinds of risk regulatory wise, and also even on something we didn't talk about much, but token distribution risk, where if a bunch of people rage quit the DAO, all of a sudden has a bunch of nouns in its treasury and needs to figure out what to do. So great, very interesting arguments from both sides. I would love to see conversation on this happening, even when we're not initiating it here. And we'd love to listen to you all, and we will digest and let you guys know what's next on our end. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elad and David. Thank you, Verbs, for coming to us and asking us to host this. It was really informative to hear both sides. And thank you to all of our panelists who came up to chat with us today. Thank you, 41 and Digital, Vape, Dev, Hindsight, DCF, God, Darlington, anyone else that I might have missed. Really appreciate all of your perspectives. If you enjoyed this conversation, we do spaces here on the Noun Square many times a week. We're up to over 45 shows a week here on different topics relating to Nouns DAO and other Nounish sub-DAOs, including our flagship show that airs every day at 9 o'clock, which is the end of the daily Nouns auction. And that moves around a bit, so follow the clock icon there with all the emojis. We got a Aptoshi over there on the clock. Follow us there, and you can find out about all of our shows that are coming up. Toshi, as we're closing out here, do you want to just give a quick summary of the schedule of what's coming up on TNS here today?
Oh, yeah. Today and tomorrow, over 10 shows. Thank you, everyone who participated in this space. I personally feel like I learned a lot, and I hope that everybody here in the audience got to learn too. As we always do, this space is recorded, so I would advise you to send it to your friends, send it to anyone that couldn't make the space. Same thing with State of the DAO from yesterday. I couldn't make it, but was super stoked that I got to listen to the recording. So we're always here at the Noun Square. Basically, if you ever have free time during the day, just check this little Nouny clock. Right after this space, we have Shark DAO. Hey, Joshua Fisher, I see you down there. 6 p.m., Blooms in Season, if you like to talk about gardening and the future of food. 8 p.m., Tiny Tuesdays with Tiny Dinos. And then, of course, our main show for the day, Noun O'Clock Live. That's going to be at 9:45. We are pushing this auction straight into the wee hours of the night. Love it. We're going to be there with the Noundles. So if you're like me and you're like, what is a Noundle? Go ahead and tune in tonight, 9:45, so you can find out. Tomorrow, we love all of our international communities, and they seem to love Wednesdays. We're going to start off the day 10:30 with Nouns DAO Japan. Take a little lunch break with Todi and Sam Ellis for the lunchbox at 12. Just a little 15 minutes to fill you in on what's happening with the community. 1 p.m. A Decent Proposal with Sam Ellis. 2:30 Twande Nouns Africa. Let's go Nouns Africa. 7 p.m. Nouns Dow Amigos. I mean, literally, whatever language you speak, please just come here tomorrow. Just leave this space on in your house while you're doing stuff. 7 p.m. That was Nouns Dow Amigos. 8 p.m. Food Down O'Clock. End the night with an awesome, yummy Wednesday dinner. And then at 9:50 again, our normal 9 o'clock show, Shadow, who is a little nouner, a little sister. She is going to be debuting her song live. So food, fun, music, international communities, debates, rage quits. Oh my gosh, Nouns has all of it. Make sure you come here. Thank you again to all of our guests. That was so cool. I feel like I learned a lot, and I think,
Yeah, me
yeah,
too. It was great.
like,
We're gonna tackle Elad and David and make them do this every 2 weeks.
yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
guys.
And I also think, like, when is these Steve Wink office hours? Would love that. Love that, man.
That sounds good. And just a reminder, if you want to rage quit the spaces, you just hit the leave button on the top right.
Easiest rage quit ever. Thank you guys again.
Thanks, Noun Square. See you next time.